This week, we decided that we were going to do a bit of a reflection on 2024 because there's been a whole bunch of lessons and changes that we've observed, that we've made some really intentional decisions about how we're interacting with them, and we thought it might be helpful to share those with you. The first piece we want to pick up on is around the observation of the current culture that we're all operating in, that we're running our businesses in. And the way that I would describe this is that there is a lot of noise and activity in the market where everyone's in a rush and everyone is promising, these big guarantees of success and showcasing all the glitz and the glamour of what they're saying working with them will deliver for you and your business. And this really unhealthy relationship is happening where, because we are operating in an environment where the speed of change is epic, the amount of things we have to get our heads around, the demands on us as leaders is really significant, there is a part of most of us, myself included, that feels stretched and is drawn to, there's an appeal if someone says, I can fix that for you. Just pay me and I'll sort it out. The thought that you could just go, oh my gosh, thank you, pass something and it will be magically sorted out is appealing. I get the appeal. But the problem is that when I look at the patterns over and over again with the businesses that I work with the leaders that I talk to, people are paying serious cash, putting massive amounts of their time, dedication, team resources into all these disconnected projects here, there and everywhere with the hope that this particular expert or that consulting firm or this project or framework is going to fix something in the business that will ultimately kind of make things run smoother, that will take away some of the blocks, if you like, that are feeling like they're not working in the business. And in that, the time, money, hopes, our actual anticipation of it would be such a relief to get this sorted are being dashed every time. We're wasting that energy. And what I'm seeing is that current culture and the patterns of how we're spending our resources, time, money, all of that, are leading to people not having the headspace and budget to do the long-term strategic work they actually need to build a thriving business. And all of my focus in our work at Benefit Capital is around helping you build a thriving business in an uncertain market. And if you keep falling into that trap of bringing in the wrong expertise in a disconnected way in the hope that it will magically fix discrete elements of the business, you're going to keep being disappointed. It was really interesting with a client that I'm working with at the moment. I got some feedback after pulling together a whole bunch of disconnected elements of work they had previously hired other people to do and mapping out a really focused strategic plan for them. And I want to read to you what they said because my guess is there'll be others who are feeling this same pain point. So this was the feedback. That's the first time that I've ever seen somebody lay out a connected plan like that. The problem is we bring people in and give discrete instructions, redesign the logo, fire those people, and it creates upheaval. We're paying people to do things, but there's no strategy. So every iteration of the new consultant that gets thrown in comes in with a new plan or framework. We've spent so much money and all these projects for work we can't use. Nothing is connected. I wanted to share that piece with you to kind of bring it home into that frustration, the reality of what you're probably feeling, other managers and executives in your organization are feeling when we're doing all the things, spending the money, putting the effort in, putting the intellectual grunt behind projects, consultants, frameworks, etc., and we're not seeing the results we want. What I want to talk to you about in terms of these reflections that I've been having around 2024 and some of the shifts we've made on the back of our spotting of these patterns is that true mastery takes time, right? So the cultivation and commitment to deliberate practice and actually building mastery takes time. And there are no shortcuts. So anyone who says otherwise is absolutely in a category of trying to sell you something that is going to ultimately disappoint you, because there's not a magic solution to any of this. But here's the other piece that I think is really important as we kind of start to talk about the problems of the current culture, but move into some better solutions. The problem is that while there aren't any shortcuts, and I stand by that, I also don't believe that the answer lies in constantly pushing, the hustle, the grind, those elements of really just bulldozing over every obstacle that could have been a lesson, bulldozing over it and forcing our vision or our plan onto the current moment, whether it's ready or not. I don't think that that is healthy. I don't think it's wise. And I have watched too many iterations and cycles of people trying to do that to know that it is not in our best interests. To push something to resolution prematurely doesn't actually get us the kind of outcome we want. So I want to lay those two ideas together for you. I'm a fan, as anyone who's been engaging for a while knows, of what I talk about as a both and mindset, right? So two seemingly opposing or contradictory things can be equally true. So there are not shortcuts to mastery, but I want you to also hold in your mind that what I'm not saying is that other element of the current culture, which is this grind, hustle, push, do it anyway, do it scared. That kind of energy is also not the answer, because what it fails to do is have the patience and discernment to sit in a moment, read the situation and see, is the time right? Is there something else that has to happen? Do we need to let this emerge more naturally? So those two pieces are kind of the first piece I wanted to talk about in terms of the current culture and what we're observing with that. If we move into the second area and lean in a bit more to this idea of mastery, I said that mastery takes time. There is no shortcut. The truth is that when we look at what is going to set our business up for long-term success, what's going to make us robust, what is going to allow us to build that business I mentioned before, of like a thriving business that is flourishing even in these uncertain markets. The piece that's going to allow that to happen is something that comes about when we learn to differentiate our business to others. And that happens when we have identified and lean into our brilliance. And one of the elements around this piece that's really interesting is so many times I have this conversation with people where it is quite difficult for people to shift from being used to being the person who's the high performer, has the answers. People come to you for the solution and they expect quality. That's what you're known for. When we start to go on this journey of, okay, we need to identify what those elements are. We want to work towards mastery in certain pieces that we've decided are strategically important. That journey to brilliance is going to require you at some moments to sit in a space of being a novice, to step into things where you are not yet a master. And this piece is something that a lot of people struggle with. And I wanted to make a little connection for you to one of the pieces that for quite a while now, I think it's 2 years probably that we've been doing the podcast. But the podcast for us in our work and our other content that we're putting out there sits very intentionally in this category of a piece that we know has to be a central element of our business, and we need to learn to master that sharing of ideas, the storytelling, the bringing people in, planting seeds and awakening possibilities of how they can do business differently, telling those stories, right? Bringing that to life in a way that no one else has before is going to require mastery. Now, I am far from a master in those areas. And so our podcast and our content is a perfect living example of us modeling this, where we are out there doing the reps, doing this in a deliberate way. So deliberate practice is at the heart of it. We're not just randomly continuing to do the same thing. We're changing things. We're getting feedback. We're trying this, trying that. Not in a reactive throwing spaghetti at the wall kind of way, but in a really intentional path towards trying to build mastery. And for many years, I sat in that category of, probably for 5 years, I knew I wanted to have a podcast, but in my mind, I had the vision already at that level of mastery. It had to be Oprah worthy, it had to be perfect. I wanted the studio and the setup and the interviews to be live and for it to just be beautifully produced. I had an image, a vision in my mind, and I have a very good imagination. And so I never started the podcast because I knew I couldn't yet deliver it at that standard. I was not a master. Where that has shifted for me in this particular example in the last few years is that as I researched more, read more, looked into it, I saw this pattern come up where different people were saying it takes 100 episodes to get any good at podcasting. And so I went, okay, I'm just going to let myself be pretty crap for the first 100 episodes. I have no expectation that I'm going to be a great podcaster. I have no expectation that this is going to take off and that there'll be loads of listeners and it'll be, amazing and at the level where I want it to get to eventually. And it has been really interesting with both the podcast and the other content and posts that we put out. The amount of conversations I have with people where they say, oh my gosh, you're really brave. Like, how are you doing that? I wouldn't be able to do that. And it sits in this category that I want to encourage. Your version will be different. Like, it may not be a podcast, it may not be content, but there will be something that needs to be in the category of mastery, either in your own leadership, management within your company, or at the level of, from the company's perspective, strategically, it's going to be important that you can really dominate that space, right? And that you are not currently masters of. You haven't mastered it. And once you identify those things, I really want you to think about my story I just told of the podcast, of saying, how can we reframe this? How can we lower the intensity and expectation so that we don't feel like unless it's perfect, we can't do it? And really see it as an experiment. And just when you're honest about that also, it's not embarrassing. I don't care how successful or great or, beautifully produced something is, because we're learning, right? I don't expect it to be great. So therefore, it's not embarrassing. And I would love for you to, in your reflections on this year and thinking about how that plays out for you in 2025, to find something that's in this category that you've known for a long time you need to master and you've been putting it off because you couldn't come in already brilliant. You weren't going to be wonderful on day one. And just think about that and start to come up with a plan for how you can create those conditions around you that it's more conducive to you starting in 2025, because mastery takes time. The second element here in this category, where we're looking at kind of the truth about mastery, that it takes time. We need to be brave and step in and be a novice. The second piece that I want to look at in the same category is around brilliance. Because while there are some of those pieces that we need to build up mastery in, there are also areas where we actually have, either individually or as a company, a genuine brilliance that distinguishes us, differentiates us from the competition. And I don't see enough people leaning into that brilliance. I could go on for ages. I'm going to try to control myself to not go in too many different directions with this piece around brilliance. So I'm going to stick to the aspect of how important it is for us to identify that brilliance and then really lean in, like give it the spotlight it deserves, put it front and center in a way that most of us are not doing. We're kind of trying to be all things to all people, we're saying, ooh, the market's wanting this or the competition's doing that, so we should say we do that. And all that does is make us be in that really, when they talk about the water where there's blood in the water, right? There's a lot of competition. We don't want to be playing in that space. The way to differentiate, the way to leverage and get that competitive advantage over others is to identify and lean into what makes you different. And as I reflected on 2024, the reason why this piece came up for me was that for years I have always given the advice to leaders I work with, businesses I work with, that the thing that comes most easily to them, the piece that feels effortless, is the thing that you should charge the most for. Because almost always that at the root of it is your brilliance. When we see something as obvious, natural, like we have the blink ability of going, oh, I know what to do here, or I can see a connection there. Those moments of natural kind of things just clicking are what differentiate us. We undervalue them because they seem obvious and they seem easy and natural to us. And so I have always talked to people about doing that. And this year, it kind of started last year, but it really consolidated and I finally gave in. But this year, one of the elements that I was able to identify and then properly start to lean into was that one of the areas for brilliance in Benefit Capital and in the way that my brain and methodology has shaped our work is around what I call a triage. So we do this thing, a business triage. And if you want to think about it, usually even if someone comes in and they're using words like an audit or a review, they have a very structured, predefined framework or set of categories or questions, and it's being laid over the top of your business and you kind of squeeze yourself to try to fit into their framework. I flip that on its head. When I do a triage of a business, there is this very important distinction between what I see in the market more broadly in terms of other consultants and other advisors, where they don't actually have any curiosity or the capability to dive into the detail of your specific context as a business. And in our work, context is everything. And we always did the triage process, but we would kind of bunch it on to other elements or a workshop, add it in, didn't really profile it, charge for it, or acknowledge just how critical that piece was and how much it actually was the distinction, the differentiator between our approach and other consultants. And in reflecting this year and in taking my own advice that I always gave to others, I have brought the triage process absolutely front and centre and lent into that, because it is when we do a triage in the way that we do, where we get all the information, like there's no such thing as too much data. The more data, the happier my brain is. So we pull that together and pattern and make sense of and understand the whole, all of the pieces that are going on in your business. From that place of understanding that pattern, we can identify for you those leverage points. We can identify and map out the plan, the priorities. And we're doing it, not getting you to fit into some predetermined cookie cutter solution of like, here's what you should do. But we're then moving into any kind of design work that we do with you based on a deep, genuine understanding of your unique context. If we connect this piece to the very first piece I spoke about related to the current culture, and I gave you the example of the client who was like, oh my goodness, this is the first time I've ever seen anyone actually connect all these little siloed, disconnected pieces of work we've had done previously. When you look at this and say, okay, this type of approach to the triage means that we are going to be strategic in a whole new way. It means that we're not going to just come up with a disconnected solution for this department over here or for this problem over here or do a rebrand. Instead, anything we come up with is going to be informed by and connected to the whole. That shift for me this year around leaning into and highlighting and profiling the element of brilliance around triage and how that differentiates our work has been a game changer. One of the pieces of feedback that we got recently from a client we did this with, the CEO sent through some feedback, and so that I honour what he actually said, I'll read you his feedback. I was super impressed with the methodology behind your approach. The triage was so incredibly important to the process, as you were coming with all and more knowledge than any of us had, even though we had access to that information. From that deep knowledge, you could challenge and question, really making us work for what is next. This piece, and the reason why I've shared that feedback and that quote with you, is to point out that by me leaning into that unique brilliance of ours around the triage and holding my ground on why it's valuable, why it's a critical part of the process, we're actually able to get better results for our clients. So that feedback from the CEO where he said, oh my goodness, you were able to come in to these sessions with information that we all had available to us, but we had not connected in the same way. And so unlike a consultant who just rocks up for a one-day workshop and doesn't understand your context and is sort of throwing ideas here and there, and it might feel exciting in the moment, but actually it doesn't connect to anything. It's not informed by what you've already done. It doesn't have front and center where you're trying to go or what's important to you as a company. The triage and me leaning into the brilliance of that is actually allowing clients to get better outcomes. And that is a piece that moving into 2025, we're going to lean into even more and keep working on how we articulate and differentiate ourselves in the market from other consultants based on that brilliance. So you, in your own work, need to do that same thing of don't just try and be like everyone else and be all things. Figure out where you have those elements of unique brilliance. Honour and respect it. That's what you should be charging the most for, because it is absolutely where your brilliance and what you offer lies. The last piece that I want to wrap up with today is to kind of take those ideas of, we've talked about some of the challenges of the current culture, the reality that mastery takes time. And so what are those areas that you want to commit to and lower the heat, lower the expectations, just practice, just get out there and do some experiments without expecting yourself to be brilliant yet. Equally, how do you identify and raise put on a bit of a platform, the areas where you are brilliant, and use those to differentiate your company. So we've talked through those three things that are the sort of reflections that I've had on this year. But when I think about what this means for each of us as leaders going into 2025, the piece that I want to leave with you is that if you go through that process I've just described, what will happen is that with the type of triage work that I'm talking about that allows you to get that insight and pull together all of the disconnected little siloed parts of the business, the difference of what you're going to be able to do in 2025 is that the triage process is going to allow you to have the pragmatic elements of, okay, we need to be able to find the levers to pull now and start working on the existing business, right? We have to be pragmatic. But equally, from the insights we gain through that triage process and through identifying our brilliance and leaning into it, we then, if we want to ultimately build thriving businesses in this uncertain market, we need to actually commit to creating the space for the thinking, the reflecting, the testing out and building of those pieces that aren't in the urgent reactive category, like all the things that are getting our attention at the moment, but they are critically important from a long-term strategic perspective of what needs to be built into our business. And so the thing I want to leave you with as we wrap up today is for you to take the time at the end of the year and moving into the new year to think about those two pieces. How do you in 2025 not be so stuck down in the weeds and the reactive aspects of just trying to keep your head above water that you're only doing the really short-term, front-of-mind, urgent pieces? How do you move into a category that's not swinging to the total opposite and dropping the ball on the now, everyday aspects of business, but how do you move into a category that pragmatically is chipping away at and being consistent on the current aspects that the business needs to keep operating, but that is taking that leadership role, that strategic role seriously, to be absolutely locking in the time, space and support you need to build the long-term elements of what will allow you to have a robust, thriving business. Because businesses that survive and thrive in this market do business differently. And the beautiful thing about, if you're listening to this and if you're connected into myself and Benefit Capital, is that we can help you do that. We can show you how to do business differently. We can do that in a completely different way to all of the consultants that you've currently been paying and bringing in and not getting the results that you need. So as you shift and as you think about this for next year, if you're curious and if you want to see what doing business differently might look in your particular business, I would love to chat to you, because these are conversations that need to be happening now, and this is work that needs to be beginning as soon as possible so that you can have the time frames to build these things out without having to make really drastic changes that will undermine your business. I want to help you strengthen the financial stability of your business. I want you to get better results, but do that in a way that is really meaningful. Thank you so much for coming on the journey with us this year. Once again with the podcast, we really appreciate it. We're very aware that there are so many things you can listen to, and so we're thankful that you're on the journey with us as we work towards mastery, but are very much still in the space of being a novice and experimenting and figuring this out as we go. So thank you for doing that. We are going to take a 2-week break over the holiday period. So there will be 2 weeks with no podcast, and then we'll be back from the 8th of January. Hope you have a wonderful break and are able to really have some headspace and be with the people you love and feel energized to start 2025 in a really strategic, focused way, bringing all of your brilliance and the unique things that differentiate your business to the world.